We'll make a start to today's Q2 quarterly economic briefing, and thank you so much for turning up today. It's great to see so many people here live and in real life. We're doing something slightly different today as well. We are actually live streaming this on the Chamber's YouTube channel as well. So please don't let that put anybody off here in the room. It's just a different way of getting to a much wider audience, and also a way of making sure that people who can't come here for whatever reason can also take part in proceedings and hear what's going on with things with the economy, and also give them an opportunity to ask questions as well. So I'll be monitoring the chat on that. Obviously today is all about launching the latest results of our Q2 quarterly economic survey. I'd just like to thank today's sponsors as well, Avast, for covering today's events, and we'll be hearing from Paul Morse a little bit later in proceedings. And we'll also be hearing as well from Jenny Martin from Morgan Sindall a little bit more about the construction sector as well and what's going on in there in a little bit more detail. Obviously, the main part of the event will be Subra going through the latest quarterly economic survey figures. After that, like I said, we'll have Paul, then we'll have a panel session and open it up to questions as well. So if you have got any questions, please just keep hold of them, and we'll try and get as many of those in before we finish with that. So it's quite a packed agenda. Like I said, anybody watching the live stream on YouTube, please put your comments, questions in the chat. We'll try and get through those as well. So it's a real test of my whatever the word is. What's it called? Multitasking. That's the one. I can't even think of words anymore. Multitasking ability today. And I'm using a microphone as well, which is a first for me, because usually my voice doesn't need much amplification, but obviously we have got a technical requirement for it today. So anyway, without any further ado and stupid gossip, I'll hand you over now to Subra to take us through the quarterly economic briefing for Q2. Subra, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and also thank you particularly for those of you who did fill in the survey. For anybody coming to one of these events for the first time, I just want to talk about what the QES is, first of all. It's the UK's largest business sentiment survey. It's a business confidence survey. It has got a very good response rate, 350 to 400 on average every quarter. And the interesting thing about the QES is that it is the first to be published in any quarter. So we get the quarter's results in the same quarter that the field work was conducted. So what I'm presenting today are the results for the quarter that ends today, the 30th of June. Okay. So it is kind of ahead of the curve, and certainly well ahead of the curve when you compare it with national data, which is often 6 to 8 weeks behind the publication of the QES results. And as I was saying, we do get a good response rate, and that's important. And so I would encourage as many of you as to fill it in as possible, because the larger the response rate, the more accurate the results, the more representative it is of what is happening in the economy in general. GM's QES itself has got the same sample size, so slightly higher than some other national surveys. So you can consider how reliable these results are going to be. Nationally, the Chamber of Commerce networks see QES gets about 6,000 responses every quarter. So it's a comprehensive survey in that sense. And for that reason, it is actually very reliable. It has been able to disprove, but also give forward indications to what's coming in the economy later. So, for example, it very accurately predicted the recessions in the 1990s and the late 2000s. But it was also able to disprove the fact that there will not be a double-dip recession in 2012, 2013. And that's something that we could gain from the QES results. And for all of these reasons, it is very well used by policymakers at the Treasury, the Bank of England, and others as well. Okay, so what will we be covering this morning? We'll first of all go through the Greater Manchester Index, talk about demand, both domestic and overseas, talk about cash flow positions and how that is impacting business investment, price pressures. You can't escape an economic discussion today without actually talking about inflation and prices. So we'll touch upon prices. And then finally, I'll just summarize what's happening in the labor market as well. And just one thing to note, when you look at the slides, unless otherwise specified, the QES results are presented as balances. So it's the difference between the proportion of positive responses to a question and the negative responses to a question. So they are not simple percentages, they are actually balances. But there are a couple of questions on which we report simple percentages, and that's specified in the slides. So you may be wondering what the Greater Manchester Index is. Now, that's a composite economic indicator, and probably the key takeaway from this morning, it's one number that gives you a snapshot of where the Greater Manchester economy is in a particular quarter. And an upward movement in the Greater Manchester Index is what we are hoping to gain every quarter, because that indicates robust economic growth. And a downward movement is often not good news. Okay, and it was able to capture the full impact of the pandemic as well. So the Greater Manchester Index is based on 7 different QES measures. We combine that into one number, and that's your key takeaway. Okay, so on to the results now. So in terms of the Greater Manchester Index, which I'll begin with, the index actually went down by 1 full point this quarter. It was 32.3 in the previous quarter. Before that, it was 32.5. So it has been declining slightly in the last couple of quarters. But having said that, the Greater Manchester Index has been at that 31 mark for pretty much the last 5 quarters. And what that indicates to me is that we had the post-COVID pandemic economic boom, the recovery. I wouldn't necessarily call it a boom, but we had that recovery from that low base, but that has now kind of stabilized. And actually, the other indicators, when we look at the Greater Manchester Index in conjunction with the other indicators, it actually indicates that the economic outlook is actually weakening rather than strengthening or even staying same. And we will look into some of these measures. So the Greater Manchester Index for this quarter is at 31.3, which is 1 full point down from where it was in the previous quarter. So what contributed to that decline? Domestic demand declined in both manufacturing and services. And that's the key issue here. And we will look into domestic demand in some detail, in more detail than I usually do in other quarters. Domestic demand has gone down in both manufacturing and services. Construction seems to be fairly stable in this quarter. There has been hardly any improvement in international trade activity. It has been on pretty low levels since the pandemic, but actually even before that. And there are other issues which are actually coming to the surface now with regards to international trade. The EU exit being one of them. And then cash positions have weakened further. So we had the decline in demand, and consequently cash positions have also gone down. But the one interesting thing about cash positions is that although demand recovered to the mid-20s to the 30s, cash positions never did after the pandemic. And to me, that indicates 2 things. One is that there is still a lot of supporting the balance sheet with cash positions. And the second thing is that I think there is still a lot of money, especially in some sectors, that is stuck in inventory and so on. So that's probably what is indicating that cash positions aren't strengthening yet. But on the bright side, employment prospects remain stable. 81% of the businesses who responded to the survey, and obviously it is you business leaders who are responding to the survey. And all I'm doing is sort of playing back your own comment, your own results back to you, right? So this is what you have told us. So 81% of those of you who are trying to recruit are trying to fill full-time positions, and that's actually very good news. The flip side of that is that recruitment difficulties are still high, and the latest ONS data on the labor market indicated that, where it said that we still have a record number of vacancies, and there aren't enough people. So the shortage now is on the supply side rather than the demand. Now, business investment shows a further quarterly decline. And again, this is one of the other situations that we have been facing with for quite some time, and this goes beyond the pandemic. So even before the pandemic, business investment in the UK was not as high as the OECD average or even the G7 average. It has been low. It has seen a further quarterly decline. And we'll look into business investment as well. Because for me, that is the critical issue. It's what is going to support the economy going forward. Is it going to be consumer spending, or is it going to be business investment and expansion? And then high inflation, obviously, is a big worry. We will look into inflation as well. But we are now seem to be getting stuck in that vicious cycle where the prices of input are going up. So raw materials are going up. There is wage inflation. And as a consequence, 2/3 of businesses are raising the prices at which they sell their goods and services. And so, that's going to add further inflationary pressure into the economy. And that's what the data is showing. So just a recap on the Greater Manchester Index, it shows at 31.3. Now, the Greater Manchester Index, to a good degree, matches what's happening in the UK GDP as well. So when we compare the Greater Manchester Index with quarterly GDP growth, actually, it gives us a very good indication of what might be coming in the next 2 to 3 months. Now, the index has been fairly flat for the last 5 quarters. And as you know, UK growth has also been fairly flat for the last 3-4 quarters. We have had, very little growth. We had 0.8% growth in the first quarter, but that was primarily made up of growth in Jan and Feb. In March, the UK economy actually declined by 0.1%, and then in April, it went down another 0.3%. However, in the first quarter, all 3 sectors actually grew. Services grew by 0.4%, manufacturing by a pretty decent margin there, 1.3%, and then construction seems to be propping up some parts of the economy with nearly 4% growth in the construction sector. But again, all 3 sectors have declined since the first quarter. And we now have data for both April and May. The GDP data for June will come out in about 6 weeks. So I think that will prove to us that we do not have further growth in any of those sectors. So what contributed to growth in that first quarter? It was investment, and it was the ICT sector, so technology, digital, that was doing okay. Transportation and logistics, which seems to be recovering again from the pandemic. Do remember, transportation and logistics was one sector which was badly hit during the pandemic, right? So it seems to be recovering now. And that's one of the sectors which seems to be recovering a bit later than others. And that's probably why we are seeing that increase in transportation and logistics. However, wholesale, retail, and motor trades, which is where we club all of the wholesale spending in, all of the retail spending, etc., that actually declined by 2.3% in the first quarter. And so hold on to that thought, that the fact that consumer spending is actually going down based on this data, because that's an important issue to consider later. And when it comes to investment, although government investment increased, business investment fell by 0.5% in the first quarter. So again, that is something else that we do need to come to terms with. Okay. Right. If I haven't really spread the doom and gloom now, I will continue. But hopefully I'll have something optimistic to say later. Or you might have something optimistic to say later. So let's look at the component parts of the Greater Manchester Index. Now, first up, domestic demand and overseas demand. That's the QES demand data. And as I was saying earlier, both of those measures have actually declined. Now, we measure domestic demand as in 2 questions. It's sales that took place in the current quarter, and it's also any advance orders for the next quarter. Both of those have declined in this quarter. And overseas demand on exports, again, advance orders from overseas customers, but also quarterly exports, they have both declined. And when it comes to international trade, we do have to bear in mind 2 or 3 things. One is supply chain disruption. That is still a big issue. The difficulty in getting hold of components, the high cost of shipping, which one of our members was telling us for a 40-foot container. Before the pandemic, it used to be perhaps 1,500 pounds, but it's now 15 to 17,000 pounds. So there has been a 10, 11-fold increase in the cost of shipping goods from Asia to Europe. That's one issue we are going to have to face. But at the same time, the pound is a lot weaker. So you would expect exports to have picked up, but really exports haven't, while our imports have gone up, right? So there are other factors which are affecting the UK's ability to expand exports and international trade. And I think all of the Brexit-related issues, which are slowly surfacing now, have contributed to that decline in overseas trade. Okay, so let's look at domestic demand in some more detail. So which parts of the economy are actually facing the most pressure now? On the chart on the left, I have split the data down by size of the business. So it's the small businesses, those businesses with less than 250 employees that are most affected. And in that group, the really small businesses with less than 50 employees are again the most affected. So that's where we have seen the decline in domestic demand. But when it comes to the large businesses with 250 or more employees, okay, there has been a slight decline, but it's within the margin of error. So it looks like under the current economic climate, the larger businesses with probably more negotiating power, with more purchasing power, the economies of scale to their advantage, seem to be doing okay at this moment, but the small businesses are getting affected. And that's not great news because 98% of the businesses in the UK have less than 250 employees. And I think 96% have less than 50 employees. So, really, that demand issue affecting small businesses is not great news, and we need to reverse that trend. So that's looking at the domestic demand data by employee banding, size of business, but which particular sectors are being affected. So between the first quarter and the second quarter, the largest drops have been in business to consumer services and in manufacturing. Okay, so I told you earlier, in the first quarter, retail sales, wholesale, etc., went down by 2.3%. That's clearly having an impact on business to consumer services. And the reason I harp on business to consumer services and consumer spending is this. A lot of the growth that we had in 2021 was because of consumer spending. That's us spending our money, the holidays that we couldn't take in 2020, the purchases that we couldn't make in 2020, all of that contributed to growth in 2021. And if you have attended this event before, I'm probably sounding like a broken record now, because this is something I have said again and again. Consumer spending is not going to see us through this situation. We need business investment, because there is a limit to consumer spending. A, because once those pent-up savings have been utilized, there isn't much scope for expansion. But under the current circumstances, when you have very high inflation and the squeeze on household budgets, discretionary spending by households is going to be significantly curtailed. And that's what has contributed to that significant decline in business to consumer services. The B2B services, so the insurance, banking, probably even technology, accounting, legal, etc., which gets classified under B2B services, they're okay, because those are things that you probably, as a business, you can't do away with them. So B2B services are doing okay in this quarter. Construction, as I was saying earlier, actually demand for construction has gone up slightly. That's again good news. But the situation in manufacturing is particularly worrying. And in terms of the services, the drop in demand, the percentage points drop in demand was about 23% in services. In manufacturing, it was a 25% drop. So manufacturing was at 25 points in the last quarter. It has now come down to near zero. It was one or just under 2. So the situation in manufacturing is actually quite concerning. And if there are any manufacturing businesses amongst you, I would really like your views on this. We have spoken to some of our members, Graham being an important contributor to this intelligence. And we think there are 2 or 3 things taking place in the manufacturing sector. One is the inability to get hold of raw materials quickly. So there is a lot of cash that is stuck in inventory, which we will look into when we look at cash positions as well. Number 2, it's because they are going to have to place orders well in advance. So the production processes are taking place, but then the outlook is uncertain. So demand is weak anyway. So the manufacturing sector is actually being hit both on the supply side and on the demand side, which is actually causing that significant drop in sentiment around domestic demand. So the manufacturing sector situation at this moment is not looking great. That's not just in GM, and I haven't really made this up because we have got national data to back up those stats as well. And that has been building up, and actually precious little has been done in terms of intervention in the last few months. And that's now really coming to a head now. So B2C services significantly down, manufacturing really down, B2B services doing okay, and then construction is also seen to do okay. Now, what further evidence do we have for that data? And we do have the evidence in national data. So the chart on the left has got information on services, production, and also retail sales, which is a sub-component within retail, within services. Let's look at retail sales first. So the teal green line here is retail sales volume. So it's the quantity of goods that are sold and bought across the UK. So this is not specific to Greater Manchester. It's actually national data coming from the Office for National Statistics. And then the yellow line there is retail sales value. Now, we are having a very big discussion on inflation now in the last kind of 3 or 4 months. But actually, inflation started going up in March, April of last year, right? And when inflation started picking up, you could actually see that the prices have held steady. So the volume has gone down, but the prices, the value has actually crept up ever so much. So that indicates to me that we are actually paying a lot more, but consuming a lot less. So the prices of goods, food prices have gone up. Most materials have gone up across the board. And in terms of the manufacturing sector, this was the other issue that came up. The price of copper, one of our members was saying, has gone up by 400% in the last 7-8 months. The price of nickel and other precious metals, they have all gone up 300, 400, 500, 600% in some cases. So there is a lot of stress on the manufacturing sector. That's in turn pushing prices up. Plus you have the cost of energy bills, household budgets squeezed. So consumption of various goods have gone down, including food, but the value seems to be going up. So we are paying a lot more, consuming a lot less. And this to an extent does not factor in the quantity depletion. So when you go into the supermarket now, you see goods which are priced pretty similar to what the price was maybe 12 months ago, but the quantity has shrunk, right? Your 500-gram packs have now become 400 grams. And if you were to factor that into a mathematical model, what you might find is that inflation is actually much higher than the 9.1% that we are seeing in the headline numbers, right? So retail sales, that's the situation. And this is the evidence for the fact that there are limits to consumer spending propping up the economy. We need further business investment. Okay. And when it comes to the index of manufacturing, since January 2022, the manufacturing sector's performance output has actually consistently been dropping. For 4 months, it has dropped. And that fully mirrors what we have seen in the QES data, that the manufacturing sector is under some stress at the moment. And then the index of services, overall index of services has declined marginally, but only marginally, because B2B services, which is a big component within the service sector, is still doing okay. It's the B2C services that are getting affected. So that's on retail sales, manufacturing, and services. And then looking into construction, construction output until April has been fairly stable. We haven't seen any significant decline. There is a little bit of volatility in construction, going from 1 month to the other, 1 quarter to the other. But construction seems to be fairly stable, and hopefully Jenny can either confirm or disprove what I'm saying. And then new orders in construction, again, there is a little bit of volatility from 1 quarter to the other, but there's been a marginal decline in the first quarter of 2022. But I expect that is going to pick up in this quarter, and that's usually what happens. It's just the cycle at which projects are approved and projects are going upstream, etc. Okay? So, for our demand data that we have gathered via the QES, there is real hard evidence in the national data. But remember, we have been talking about this since the 3rd or the 4th quarter of last year, and national data is now confirming what we have been warning about for quite some time, especially on that business investment and consumer spending issue. Okay. So that's on demand. Moving on to cash flow, and to more bad news, unfortunately. Cash flow positions have again declined. Now, as I was saying earlier, demand across all the 3 sector groups in the first and the second quarter of 2021, so last year, actually had recovered to the high 20s, touched 30. But cash flow positions never went above 15, right? And that again is not surprising because there was a lot of debt that was taken on during the COVID pandemic. There was a deferred tax liability, a payment of which became due, I think, towards the beginning of last year. We had VAT reversals, etc. The VAT reductions which were reversed last year. So we have had lots of things happen with regards, policy that seems to have impacted the cash flow of businesses. And again, under the current economic climate, when we have a significant inflation on the input costs, again, cash flow is being affected. And as we have seen in the manufacturing sector, there is a lot of cash that is stuck in inventory. right? Because they just can't get hold of the materials, and when they can get hold of the materials, they are a lot more expensive. So the just-in-time model, which used to work very well and seems to work until maybe 2017, 2018, doesn't seem to be working that well at the moment. Okay, so that's the decline in cash flow. So what does it look for different sectors again? So look at business to consumer services, gone straight down. That's below zero territory. It's now minus 12, minus 13. So from positive territory, business to consumer sector cash flow has actually gone to negative territory. Even in the B2B services, there has been a slight decline. Manufacturing cash flow exactly at zero in this quarter. So as many businesses are reporting increases just as reporting decreases. So the net balance is obviously zero. So that again is a cause for concern. And then construction, the saving grace in this picture, it's the only sector that seems to have reported an increase in cash flow in this quarter. But this is not great news for the economy, honestly. I mean, this is indicative of the fact that there are lots of sectors which are under a lot of stress at this moment. It's to do with inflation, of course it is, but it is also to do with the fact that the UK economy never really recovered. And I used the word wrongly earlier. I used the word boom, which I shouldn't have. We had that kind of low base effect, which contributed to a very high percentage growth in 2021. But it is still an economy that is under a lot of stress, and probably a bit more of stress than other OECD and G7 countries. Okay, so that's the situation with cash flow. And what does that mean then for business investment? The QES data first. In the business investment data, there are two questions in the QES. One is the investment on capital projects, so machinery, equipment, buying new buildings, etc. So the expansion of capacity. And then there is also the investment in training. Now the good news here is that investment in training has gone up, and it has gone up for 2 quarters now. That's actually great news because it will help address some of the labor shortages that we are facing, right? So the more training we have and the more upskilling and reskilling we have, that's actually going to help the economy in terms of the labor availability and addressing the skill shortages that we have. However, when it comes to the investment on capital projects, that again has seen a slight quarterly decline. But here is the thing. If you look at the line all the way from the first quarter of 2019 to the current quarter, those balances were never higher than the average. The average has been around 10. So, so there are very few businesses who are actually significantly expanding capacity. And that has been the situation since 2019, which indicates to me that there isn't enough confidence in the UK for either, foreign direct investment to come in and expand capacity, or even probably UK businesses to significantly expand capacity. And I would really like your views on this. But this is what the data is showing. This is what the QES data is showing for GM. It's a very similar picture in the Northwest QES. And it's no different in the national data as well. So this is national data that is coming from the Office for National Statistics. 2 lines there. The yellow line captures investment in capital projects, so machinery and equipment, including investment in IT. And then the blue line there is overall investment. And if you look at the overall pattern, those percentages of growth have stayed pretty much just about zero since the beginning of 2019, right? So overall business investment in the UK does not seem to have expanded significantly. There was this phase, end of 2020, the beginning of 2021, when there seems to have been an increase in investment in machinery. And I think that has got a lot to do with digitalization. The adoption of technology for work from home, hybrid working, etc. That must have contributed to it. But also the various adjustments that had to be made to the workplace to make workplaces COVID safe, right? So that obviously included a lot of investment. It might have been short term. That's exactly what has happened. Since then, it has gone straight down. Now, so what can we do about a business investment? Now, the Chancellor announced a super deduction scheme, the scheme that allows a 130% deduction on capital investment. It doesn't seem to be working at the moment. And I think it is not working because of the other pressures on business. Cash flow, the high cost of materials, supply chain disruption. If you can't get hold of the raw materials for 3 or 4 months, then why would you invest on expanding capacity at this moment? It seems to make sense. And I think one good measure for the UK would be if the Chancellor were to extend the scope of super deduction. So the super deduction is due to come to an end on the 31st of March of 2023. So it ends in this financial year. But this is a financial year where businesses are facing very low cash flow. And credit is becoming a bit more expensive because of the increase in the base rates as well due to inflation. So I think it would be a very good idea for super deduction to be extended by another year, maybe another 2 or 3 years, or even have a permanent scheme so that we can unlock business investment. And if we can unlock business investment, allow businesses to expand capacity here in the UK, that must bode well for the UK economy and for sustained growth in the economy. So that's the situation with business investment. Again, I would like your views on this. And then moving on to inflation and the inflationary pressures that we feel. So UK inflation has gone up. You all know that. Consumer price inflation was 9% in April. It was 9.1% in May. Okay, that's affecting all of us. However, I would like you to focus on the 2 lines at the top. So this is consumer price inflation, which stands at 9.1% now. That's the blue line. We understand that, and we understand the impacts of it. But let's look at the orange line and the teal green line there. This tracks what is called the producer price inflation. And the orange line there is the input producer price inflation. That's split into 2, input prices and then the output price inflation. Input price inflation, the input PPI tracks the price that producers, particularly manufacturers, have to pay for their raw materials. Okay? That stands at close to 22% at the moment. Okay. So overall, the cost of energy has contributed to it, the supply chain disruptions and the cost of imported materials contributed to it, the weak pound has contributed to it. So overall, we have seen that go from nearly 0 in January 2020 to 22% at the moment. And as a consequence, one of the things I said is that many businesses, 2/3 of businesses in the latest QES results reported that they have had to increase the prices at which they sell their goods and services. Clear evidence for that, because the teal green line is the output producer price inflation. And that's at about 16%. So there has been a 16% increase in the price that producers, manufacturers are charging for their products, right? That's going to affect all of us. However, there is a flip side to it, which is good news, because one of the main contributors to this is the cost of fuel and energy. And if the situation in Ukraine actually improves quickly, then we might see energy prices actually drop. And energy prices have started stabilizing now to an extent. And if we see energy prices stabilize and then start coming down, to the $70, $80 mark, it now stands, I think, just about 100. If it starts coming down, then we will have a decline in the producer price inflation. And once the producer price inflation goes down, we might also see a consequent drop in the consumer price inflation as well. So that's what I wanted to present. So it is not all bad news when we hear national data. There are some good spots there, but we just have to dig deeper. So that's good news. And again, that clearly matches what we have seen in the QES data as well. So 2/3 of businesses, this is a percentage rather than a balance, 2/3 of the businesses expect to increase prices as a result of inflation, and just about 65%, 63, 64% of you are also concerned about inflation. That's the number one business worry at the moment. It is inflation. And again, we do have very strong evidence for that. Having said all that, and this is the optimistic note I want to end with, business confidence hasn't really gone down. There hasn't been a dent to business confidence. So many of you are very optimistic that you can both maintain revenues, so the turnover confidence, and also maintain margins. Now, clearly, the increase in prices could be contributing to this. So in terms of the turnover confidence, the optimism that you can maintain revenues, There's only been a slight drop, 62.5% to 59.2%. That's a 3% decrease, but it's well within the margin of error. If we assume 5% margin of error, still within the margin of error. And the proportion of businesses who expect optimism to decrease has also stayed pretty much the same. 12.2% in the previous quarter, 11.9% in this quarter. And the same with margins as well. And again, the higher prices could be contributing to slightly higher margins. So 49.5% of you were confident that you could maintain margins the previous quarter. It's now 48.9%. So pretty much the same levels. So the good news is the doom and gloom that we hear in the media, which I'm contributing to, unfortunately, this morning, hasn't really dented your confidence. So that's great. That's what we want. We want to be realistic. We want to be true to the data, but we don't want to be getting distracted by this. Okay? So that's business confidence. Business confidence has not taken a hit, which I think is a really good news. And it must be also representative of the fact that concerns around inflation amongst businesses in general must be transitory. That it is not going to be kind of hardwired into the economy that we are going to have consistent inflation. And the general expectation from most economists is that inflation will go down next year. And by the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024, it will have gone down to the target level of 2 to 3%. And also remember, once prices go up, they're not going to go up much higher, but they might stay there. So to bear that in mind when the Bank of England says that inflation will return to 2%. Actually, that's true, because the prices have already gone up and they're staying there. They're not increasing further. Okay, so based on that, the Q2 results do show a little bit of weakening. Inflation is going to stay high in 2022, but again, it clearly is dependent on the geopolitical situation because oil prices and energy prices are a big contributor to inflation. Energy transition is receiving a lot of focus at the moment, and I was following the G7, and there is a lot of talk about energy transition, and also some accusation that energy transition has actually taken a backseat now because the G7 countries want to prioritize energy security over transition. But we will see how that pans out. But I do believe very strongly that energy transition is going to have a very huge amount of opportunities for businesses here in the UK, but also particularly in GM, that being a priority sector. And then the GDP forecast for 2022 is still 3 to 3.5%. It was revised down from initially 4% down to 3.6%, now sort of in the range of 3 to 3.5%. Let's see how that pans out. We might revise it again in this quarter. So when you come back for the Q3 quarter, QES results, I'll tell you what the latest forecast then is. In the second quarter, however, I do expect GDP to flatline. It might be, we might have 0% growth or just above 0% growth. And if we have a decline, then bad luck. But I expect GDP to flatline. In the current quarter, we will find out mid-August, actually about the latest quarter. So recent developments have not dented business confidence, which I think is good news. And then to unlock business investment, that's the key challenge now for the UK. It is to unlock business investment. So the extension of the super deduction scheme and other measures, we have also had a big debate about R&D tax credits and so on in the UK. All of that is going to contribute to unlocking business investment and attracting more and more businesses to invest in the UK. So I'm going to pause there and hand the floor over to Chris.
Okay, thank you so much, Sabri. I'm just going to ask Sabri to come and take a breather before we move on. We just want to show our appreciation for that. And again, bear in mind, we cover an awful lot of other stuff on the QES as well, around skills, capacity, training, etc., and all that is so important at present in the current circumstances. But that this morning was a real sort of warts and all view of what the local economy and the national economy is doing. And again, just to re-emphasise a point that Sabri made, we don't make this up. This has come direct from business. This is what's actually happening out there. And that's so important, and that's the thing that is so valuable about this, even though it may probably need a bit of a health warning, I think, going forward, or maybe a wealth warning. I'm not too sure about that one. But Sabri, thank you so much for that. As I mentioned, today's sponsor is Avast Business, and now what I'd like to do is ask Paul Morse from Avast to stand up and say a little bit about some of the questions on the QES and a little bit more about the business as well. Paul, over to you.
Hi everybody. My name is Paul Morse. I work for Avast, a cybersecurity company. I've been there for about 5 years. I've been in the IT security industry for about 35 years, but to be honest, that just basically means I've got over 30 years of redundant IT knowledge, because a week is a long time in IT. These are answers to some questions that we posed through the chambers. There's no ulterior motive here. It's not one of these, how do we fix these problems by Avast. They're just some general security questions that we see a lot of when we speak to customers. This isn't going to be a cybersecurity presentation, hooray! But we need a quick sort of overview of the state of play. Surprise, it's not a cheery picture. Every year seems to be a record year for cyber attacks, for data breaches. This year's probably going to be certainly another record year. If that 10.5 trillion figure is right, damn lies and statistics, but if that is right by 2025, then cybercrime will be the third largest economy, behind the US and China. Just to put that in perspective, I've been using that comparison for years. 3 years ago, cybercrime was only Spain. It was 14th in the list, so it's doing really well for itself. Ransomware and software supply chain still the biggest threats. Ransomware was up about 17% last year. It's kind of spiky last year. 90% of ransomware steals data. So originally it was all about encryption. Now it actually steals your data. And we'll probably see that move to 100% just stealing your data. No encryption. We'll drop the encryption. It's unreliable. People don't pay. So it's all just pure extortion. Pay or we publish the data that we stole. The main three infection vectors are email, so social engineering, phishing, software vulnerabilities, exploiting those, and RDP. RDP is basically a technology to connect to devices remotely. 50% of the workforce working at home. Use of that technology increased massively, and we now see RDP used in about 50% of ransomware infections, generally sort of stolen credentials. So the email attacks, they're basically phishing. They're using social engineering. Humans, unfortunately, we're always going to be the weakest link. Humans are only human. They have this positive trust bias, but the point is to acknowledge that, accept that, plan for that. Train, test, retrain, retest. Just sort of hammering home that security message, so it's top of mind, so that when one of your employees gets that really, really important email that has to be done now, it's urgent, they don't click on the link, they stop and they think about it and they check and they sort of generally stay frosty. And 2022 has definitely been the breakout year for some technology called zero trust. You've probably seen it anyway. It's basically zero trust and data sovereignty are the big sort of issues this year. It's great for mitigating VPN and RDP attacks. It's also great for mitigating supply chain attacks. It kind of fills those security holes. And what it basically is you kind of, the name implies it. It's zero trust. You're kind of taking away that implicit trust for a digital interaction, and you're actually sort of verifying every single stage of the digital interaction. So basically, I don't care if I know your name is this and your password is this. I'm not going to believe it's you until I've verified you every single step of the way. So moving on to the questions, it's fantastic to see about 3/4 of you feel either prepared or somewhat prepared. You know, you've got a plan, you've got a CISA, you do your testing. It covers your remote workers, you know, 50% of the workforce. Hybrid is here to stay. You know, sorry, Elon, it's here to stay. It's not going to change anytime soon, so your security plan has to be able to cover the fact that people are remote and, you know, those systems aren't in the office, you don't see them, but you still got to protect them. Yep. So how do you manage your IT? And again, there's a decent split between having in-house or using a third party. There's a fair chunk of you that actually, the people that supply your IT also does your cybersecurity as well. We will see a shift in that. There will be more of a shift towards outsourcing your IT security. Figures vary a little bit, but most of them say by about 50% in 3 years' time it'll be outsourced. But that will be to specific security, you know, like managed service providers, managed security service providers. It won't be the people that supply your IT. There's a number of factors to why you would outsource. You know, like pretty much every industry, lack of staff. It's particularly bad in STEM, and obviously IT is kind of the geekiest area of STEM, so it's kind of really tricky to get decent IT staff. But it also makes sense to outsource to these people because, you know, that's what they do all day, every day. It's their job. They can do it to scale, so it does make sense. One of the issues that we see is that, you know, again, like a lot of areas, there's a huge amount of acquisition. You know, people like Kaseya buying Datto and MSPs buying other MSPs. So there is a little bit of a danger that your IT support will become a kind of race to the bottom. It's going to kind of be we'll protect your device for 50p a month, but we're just going to stick a little agent on there. We're going to do nothing with it unless something really flashes red. So the move to the digital transformation does actually help your posture there. Mainly the move to cloud. That does actually make things better. You're slightly more secure, but the flip side of that is, as I mentioned, you know, the move to hybrid. You have a larger attack surface, so that makes you slightly less secure. About 83% of SMBs said that the pandemic did actually accelerate their move towards digital transformation. How do you fund your cybersecurity? Again, there's quite a good mix there. Is that funding going to increase, I guess, is the big question. You know, as we've seen earlier, times are tight. You know, obviously I'm duty bound to say cutting your spending on cyber is not a great idea, but you have to make that decision. But looking at the stats, you know, cyber attacks on industry doubled last year. You can see the top 5 highest targeted industries there. Transport and distribution, that's the first time that's been in the top 5. But that kind of links back to those supply chain attacks. So that's the reason that that's now in the top 5. And moving on from that, do you actually have a specific cyber risk insurance policy? Again, that kind of is a bit skewed. You can pretty much say it's about 50-50. It's just the scale of the graph makes it look a lot different. Adoption of cybersecurity policies, they will increase. You know, it kind of makes sense. But the policies and the restrictions will become tighter, so you need to look at those T's and C's very deeply. We're seeing some of the requests are becoming almost a little bit silly. So we're seeing a lot of things like you've got to have web filtering, that's okay, but EDR, you know, endpoint detection and response, DLP, data loss prevention in there. S&Ps don't need that, you know. But if your cybersecurity policy says you've got to have this stuff, then kind of, you know, what do you do? So as a result, your cybersecurity premiums will go up, and then obviously as a result of the premiums going up, the ransomware payment demands are going to go up because the assumption is, well, you're insured. We can ask for whatever we want. So just quickly at the end here, these are a few stats that we've had from our Avast Threat Lab. So Avast basically, we've been going for 30 years. We're installed on about 430 million devices. So we basically get a lot of threat data coming through. So these are statistics that we've seen for last year and the Q1 of this year. So overall in the UK, we blocked about 17 million attacks a month. The first quarter of this year, 20 million. So fair increase there, about 2% increase there. For this area, for the north of the country, that's slightly less. So we've gone from 1 million to 1.4 million attacks a month that we block. And the risk ratio, this is basically, out of all the people that we protect, this is the percentage of those people that we have actually blocked an attack for. So that 2021, sorry, the first two, they should be UK, sorry, not Northwest. So the first two in the list are the UK, so that rose from 13% to 15%. And again, for this area, that kind of double, that sort of 24 to 26%, so about 2% increase. That double the percentage increase. So my kind of up at the end, as up as I can get it, unfortunately, is that although, digital security is a very daunting task, although the technologies and the types of attack change, they always target the same thing, the infection vectors. So they're always going after the same type of things. And the top three are always email, so train, retrain, phishing, social engineering, that kind of thing, get your users aware. It's attacking vulnerabilities, software vulnerabilities, decent patch management. And then there's the password type attack, so compromised credentials, so decent password management, decent password policies, obviously enable things like multi-factor authentication and that sort of thing. Yeah, there are other types of attack. There's still denial of service attack. There's still inside jobs. It's always really hard to protect against, an inside job. But just protecting against those top three things, you're pretty much on your way to a decent sort of cybersecurity set. Okay, are we doing Q&A at the end, or are we going to do it now? So thanks. If you've got any questions, please see me after class. Thank you very much for your time. Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Paul, and thanks once again to Avast for sponsoring today. They've also put a £50 voucher up for somebody to win today, which is why we've got a number of business cards and scraps of paper. They must be the new business cards in there, and I'll pick some of those, pick one out in a minute. What I'd like to do now is ask Paul to come and take a seat at the front, and I've also like to introduce Jenny Martin, who's the bid manager from Morgan Sindall, to join us at the front as well. And Jenny's going to squeeze in there and trying desperately hard not to knock anything off the table. Jenny, I'll start with you. And again, if anybody's got any questions in the audience, please have a think about it. We've had one already from the YouTube channel live stream, which I'll come to in a minute. Jenny, obviously from a construction perspective, we heard some not bad things there really in the presentation. But obviously, it's like one swallow doesn't make a summer. One good quarter doesn't make up for it. What's this current situation like in construction? Because you hear an awful lot. There's obviously rampant inflation, supply chain issues, all this, that, and the other. What is it like from your perspective?
Right. So I suppose from listening to Subra, it's what you're saying is probably on point, if I'm being honest. So with regards to what we're seeing at the moment, the pipeline for us is very, very strong in the short and medium term. However, on the flip side, we tend to price two-stage tenders, and we're actually seeing projects taking longer to get to site because of the pressure of client budgets, because of this hyperinflation with price rises. So one of the things that we're looking a lot more at now when we're getting tenders in is that they're actually coming in over budget that the clients got at the beginning because of these price rises and it not being factored in. So we're looking a lot more at value engineering and alternatives as part of the tender due to these issues. From our perspective as well, we have to plan more our projects. So very early engagement with supply chain and very early orders, particularly during the design stages, to help secure supplies and material availability. So our procurement strategies are being very carefully considered at the moment, along with risk apportionment on our schemes. However, touching on some Subra's discussion, our daily cash position is very, very strong, which does give confidence to our supply chain and helps us with securing our slots and material availability. In terms of increasing raw material costs, which is probably what quite a few people are interested in. So we've done a bit of research. We have quite a strong supply chain that come back to us with regards to market and what have you. What we're seeing at the moment, or the last 6 months from January to May, that steel has increased by over 40%, reinforcement by over 50% in cost, insulation and plasterboard is around 30% increase, and bricks around 20%. So that is obviously having an impact on tenders and tender margins. In terms of our pipeline, however, it's very, very strong at the moment, particularly in the commercial sector and the residential sector, and obviously the levelling up agenda and seeing some of the public sector projects coming through. Skills, again, touching on that, we are seeing, pay, trades, having to increase in that side of things, and wage inflation, which is obviously, again, having an impact on supply chain. Not just on site, we're just having a discussion earlier about just even finding estimators, bid managers, pre-construction staff. It's just generally in our industry there is a shortage in skilled people. With regards to going forward and challenges for us as an industry and seeing what's going to happen in, say, the next 6 to 12 months, for us, it's looking at improving our building standards with what's going on with net zero and that agenda, and reducing waste and emissions and how that will impact on how we do things. Obviously, trying to keep our people and encourage them to stay within Morgan Sindall and avoiding a race to the bottom. And then other areas for us coming through now, so the Building Safety Act, so there's going to be additional resource and reporting required, and the gateway requirements that will come alongside that. Obviously looking at net zero and embodied and operational issues, and also the updated building regulations and the focusing on energy efficiency is going to be another key area for us. So hopefully that gives everybody a bit of an overview.
Okay, I think the price increases on some of the raw materials, when you sort of say that, you can see people's eyebrows sort of raising and one thing or another. And again, it's picking up on one of the points you made in the presentation, Subra, that we're being sort of hardwired in that inflation is 9.1%, so everything is just going up at 9.1%. And when you hear that, the price of copper, you hear the other stuff going on, that's the reality, isn't it? And that's what's actually feeding this. Just picking up on the skills issues, Paul, just come to you. Do you find in your industry that the skills issues just want to pass the mic, sorry, the skills issues are impacting there as well, or is that something that, because of the type of business you're in, it doesn't really impact you?
I don't think the economy's made it any particularly worse. Obviously, it's a buyer's market for any job at the moment, but historically there have always been issues with employing people with STEM. There's a lot of gender issues there. It just doesn't attract women, and especially as I said, the IT area is incredibly geeky. So it's always been bad. There are obviously government initiatives to try and improve the take-up of STEM, but we really struggle to get decent qualified IT people.
Yeah. Just been to Simon at the back before. I don't know if anybody was listening to it. Was it Green Notches in Bolton, and they were going through the recruitment problem and basically saying, you know, you can get it. So you've got 50% of the people not even bother turning up for the interview. 50% of the people then drop out, and before you know it, you've sort of started off with a big pool of 200, and you're probably left with a couple of people at the end of it. It's quite worrying. I just want to pick up a question that I think it's Sharon Seville from First Commercial and First Executive Recruitment. It's one for you, Subra. She's asked, do you envisage that manufacturing output will continue to drop? She's put in Q2's figures, I think she may mean Q3. And if so, using your superpowers of foresight, there you go, no pressure, when would you see this improving? I don't want an exact date or anything, so, you know, but just, and we won't hold you to it.
15th of October. No. I think the outlook at the moment is quite weak. And it is, there is a lot of stress in the sector because of both those input pressures and output pressures. So I expect things to probably stay the same in the second quarter, and maybe only improve towards the end of the year, because usually the end of the year sees an increase in demand because of the festive shopping season. And I think that might be the time when we actually see manufacturing output pick up again. But it's probably going to have a little bit of stress at the moment.
Yeah, and there's so much out there. And again, one of the questions we get asked is, well, how much of this is down to Brexit? How much of this is down to whatever? And it's just virtually impossible, I think, is probably the best way to say it. It's impossible to actually disaggregate, the impacts and what percentage these are having. Has anybody got any questions in the room that you want to ask anybody? Yeah. Sorry, John. Come on.
I think when we ask business confidence, we don't have a general question. We are asking specifically about the optimism about being able to maintain turnover and then on margins. So I think it could be because from the supplier side, there is probably this view that higher prices are acceptable to the consumer now. Now there may be that element certainly which is playing in, because we saw that prices started increasing last year, and for 1 year it has actually kept on rising. Okay, we have seen that demand fall only recently, that significant decrease in demand. So I guess it is all down to the fact that there is now scope for increasing prices, and that's probably what is happening in sentiment. But I'm keen to hear the views of many of you who you can tell us. I mean, from the construction point of view, as Jenny was saying, the pipeline is quite strong. That clearly must be boosting sentiment within that sector. And I don't know what you see from your clients, John. Do they see this kind of stress that we have picked up in the data, or? Yeah, actually, that's an interesting. One of the things that many, it was one of, I don't remember which organization what it was, but it was one of those credit reference agencies that actually tracks insolvency data, and they were saying that when the furlough scheme comes to an end, towards the end of last year, there might be 1 million business failures or something. And actually, that hasn't really come to pass. Because of all of the schemes that were in place. So I guess there might also be the view that this is yet another transitory challenge. That could be contributing to business confidence at this moment. Okay, again, as Chris was saying, we have seen 2 or 3 quarters of data, a couple of quarters from the recovery phase from COVID. The latest data has shown a very marginal decline. So we'll wait really for Q3 data before actually making a prediction about that.
Okay, thanks very much. And just a couple of comments on the YouTube channel there as well about the training investment going up, and that's a little comment on the discussion we had around skills, saying obviously it's good that it's doing that, and it's the one thing that businesses should be doing more of, really, to prepare that future workforce, which is always good. And I suppose at any time, really, there's always a few things that just get immediately cut, isn't it? And training's always one of the first ones. We've seen that from previous downturns, and one thing, not to use the R word then, which I'm trying to avoid at all costs. But I think we've seen that, and it's bit of a false economy sometimes, isn't it? So let's have the hand up for a question. Thank you.
Good morning. It's Andrew Turner from Two Hats this morning, Chamber of Commerce Property and Construction Group, and also as a contractor, I work for Tilbury Douglas Construction in the Northwest. Completely agree with Jenny. We're seeing exactly the same. Anecdotally, from a meeting I was at the Chamber a couple of weeks ago, a smaller contractor, so not with the buying power of a Morgan Sindall or a Tilbury Douglas, was saying that steel prices were being held for 3 hours, so in the morning. And I think we're not seeing that, but that's the impact on supply chain further down. Whilst it's great to see positive news about the construction sector, I'm guessing that is legacy of the catch-up in terms of output from post-pandemic, and we're all busy. I don't ask this question, but I will. Is there going to be a lag? So are we going to see a slowdown whilst the pipelines are busy? There's caution there because of inflationary pressures, materials pressures, staff pressures, everything else as well. Is that likely to drop? Is public sector spending likely to drop, which will affect our business potentially in the sort of volume of public sector we do? And also whether that is likely to drop down in the next probably 2-3 quarters.
So you're looking at the Levelling Up funding and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund that's just been announced. And I've been working in a group in Morgan Sindall. We've been doing a bit of research on this, and the actual what they're putting forward, the government as the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, is about 35%, 40% less than what we get in the north as EU funding. So make out of that as you will. That's one of the things that we're looking at in terms of plugging that gap. And I think when you start to speak to some of the local councils and stuff, and the pressure that they've got as well in terms of resourcing bids to go for these pots of money too, and it's getting more and more difficult for local authorities to actually get the money out of government. Yeah, is there a shift? Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's an important point, and we're just in the middle looking at the UK SPF and the three themes and whatever, and it is fundamentally different and less than what we've been used to from the point of view of that public funding. There's also some very bizarre things in there, for example, around the skills theme. There's three themes: community place, business support, and people and skills, and the main chunk of money around people and skills only lands in 2 years' time, 3 years' time. It goes up from about $500,000 a year to 22 million a year for GM. What do you do in those intervening 2 years? You need the money now up front. It's an upfront investment, isn't it, to train your workforce? So again, that's causing all sorts of problems here.
Importance of levelling up and these shared prosperity fund. What the government have also done is to include schemes which were announced in the last 12 to 24 months within the purview of the Shared Prosperity Fund. So Multiply, which was the program announced, I think, more than 12, 15 months ago to improve numeracy skills, that's now part of the Shared Prosperity Fund. So money that was already, either provided or allocated is coming under SPF. But the importance of levelling up is highlighted by another fact. You know what the best performing region in the UK now is? There's no extra points for guessing. That is London. It has been London for quite some time. But points for guessing this. The second best performing region in the UK now. It's Northern Ireland. It's not Wales, it's Northern Ireland, right? It's not the Northwest. It is not even the Southeast. It's not the Northeast. It's actually Northern Ireland. Now, I'm not saying that is a bad thing, because Northern Ireland, again, has got lots of challenges. But that, to you, illustrates the importance of actually making those right allocations under the SPF and the importance of levelling up as well. These are regions which have been hit very badly, Northwest. And we do need to have that regional imbalances corrected.
Okay, has anybody else got any questions? We've just got a couple of minutes left. Yeah, gentleman at the back.
Okay, so net immigration data should offer us a proxy. Net immigration from the EU has actually gone down drastically, but net immigration from non-EU countries has held fairly stable. So I think it was around 250,000 plus, if I remember my stats correctly. So yes, there has been a decline in the number of EU workers coming in. Now I also wonder, we have 1 million plus vacancies at the moment, and if we had a steady supply of EU workers, would we actually have all of those positions open? And the answer is probably not, right? So yes, clearly there is that impact of Brexit on this. Now it is difficult to disaggregate entirely, because the other aspect that you mentioned is also true. There has been an acceleration in retirement, and the census data that came out just yesterday evening or so shows that in Wales, more than I think it's a fifth of the population is now 65 or older. So the pandemic, and it's not way dissimilar in England and other parts of the UK. So yes, the pandemic will have accelerated that move to retirement. And so the one thing, we have been very much focused in the labor market data about unemployment and vacancies, but there is also another piece of information in there, which is the proportion of people who are economically active versus economically inactive. And one of the concerns that we do have is whether the proportion of people who are economically inactive is slowly going up. And we have and the US data seems to indicate that that is actually starting to climb now. So it may be that people who are in their late 50s or touching 60, etc., are probably considering retirement at this time. So we have both impacting the labor market.
So again, it's not as simple as you think really with this. And like I said, I've been around this game for coming up for nearly 20 years now, and I can't remember a time when there's so many different factors coming into play, and you get two or three merging together to form one impact, and then they disappear, and then something else comes up, and one thing and another. It's very, very tricky. But I think the key thing is there's still that confidence out there, which is good to see, despite all the challenges, and we've just got to make sure that we keep going forward with that. So just like to thank you, our panel, once again for fielding those questions, both online and here in the room. Paul, just before you go and take a seat, I'd like you to close your eyes and to choose somebody. There we go. First round of the FA Cup. Is it a home fixture? Okay. Right. And the person who's got the £50 voucher from Avast is John Jones from Beavers and Struthers. John, congratulations. There you go. I'd just like to thank Paul and the team of Avast once again for sponsoring today's event and also getting questions on the QES as well. If anybody's interested in looking at our future events or anything like that, please come and have a word with one of the team. I'd like to thank Jenny as well for joining us from Morgan Sinnell to give us a real life insight into some of the challenges that's going on with the construction sector. And again, against the data there's some good points in there, but there's some longer term elements in there as well. Just a couple of notices about some upcoming events. We've got the Engineering and Manufacturing Forum this Friday, that's the 1st of July. We've got a members drop-in, a virtual members drop-in next Tuesday on the 5th of July. If you want to find out a little bit more about your membership, the benefits and things like that, please look out for that. We've got Summer Assembly a week on Friday when we'll be looking at the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, amongst other things, and some of the issues we've talked about today around some of the wider policy impacts. And we've also got some networking events coming up in Stockport and Wigan, so a nice mix there of real events and also ones online as well. So please have a look on the webpage at gmchamber.co.uk and just click on the events page there, and you can see a whole array of different types of events. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. Hope it hasn't ruined your day too much. Remember, it is Wednesday, it's hump day. So once we get over midday, we're nearer the weekend, next weekend than we were last weekend. So always take a positive from that. But thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you to everyone joining us online as well on the YouTube channel. Quite a sobering presentation, but obviously one that is completely realistic as well. We don't overplay things. We don't be too optimistic about things. We tell it like it is. Sometimes it's brilliant, other times less so. Unfortunately, we're in one of those periods at present, but I'm certain all you fantastic people here and out there running businesses day to day, you've got your best interests, the best interests of the country at heart. Keep on doing what you are doing. It's absolutely crucial that we don't lose sight of that. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much for attending.